You have one unheard message.
Hi, I was calling Current, the influencer marketing platform, but I think I just got redirected to a bunch of people listening to a podcast. Well, anyways, I was calling Current because I was told they could help get my brand set up on TikTok Shop and even build out an affiliate program of content creators promoting my brand. And even have those content creators go on live streams and promote my product there. Wow, I could really use Current. I also heard that the brands they work with are making millions in sales. I guess I'll just go to their website at current.tech.
Sam Lambert trained as an economist at the Australian National University and worked as an economist for the Australian government before joining global consulting company Oliver Wyman. He and Daniel Friedman started zenGate Global 2 years ago in Osaka, Japan. The firm employs 20 in multiple offices, including Sri Lanka, where it launched a pilot program with Sri Lanka tea producers. The Palmyra platform leverages decentralized ledger technologies from provenance and digital identities with verifiable credentials. Lambert explains that commodity markets, including coffee, rice, and grains, are rapidly digitizing and continue to evolve. He says the tea industry is experiencing a similar digital transformation, and the Palmyra platform provides an opportunity for, quote, underserved commodity producers to access new markets and leapfrog into the future. The Palmyra platform, developed by zenGate Global, enables one-stop online trades of tea and spices such as nutmeg and pepper and other commodities, and enables producers to connect directly with buyers. Welcome to the program, Sam.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about how the Palmyra platform works.
Sure. So the Palmyra platform, it's a commodity trading platform, and it's effectively a one-stop shop, which allows producers of different sizes to be able to onboard, list their products, and directly access global buyers. And the same was true as well on the buyer side as well. It provides one place where buyers from all around the world can directly source products and ensure that value flows directly to the producers themselves. And one of the things we noticed was a huge gap in trust across these global transactions. And we found ourselves in the business of trying to find ways to build and bridge the trust gaps that were there. And one of the things that we worked on was around making things such as payments, cross-border payments, super easy, making escrow payments available so that you can reduce counterparty risk, and making sure that the logistics and the customs and the certification processes of that deal was also very transparent as well. We're working quite closely with the tea producers out of several markets, as well as other commodities as well, such as spices and honey.
Will you describe for listeners the platform's relevance to the tea community globally, both in terms of smallholders and larger multinational companies?
I think the biggest impact is actually for specialty and artisanal producers and premium grade producers who don't have a formal way to sell their products. And one of the things that really fascinated me when I came and started learning about the tea sector was my understanding and my research around the way tea is sold. And you have things such as the Sri Lankan, the Colombo tea auction, several other auctions and markets where tea gets sold in bulk. And it's a great system that's been around for a while. But what became clear to me is that for certain types of products that sat potentially on the edge or the periphery of what was able to be conducted through the auction were left behind. So a key focus of ours was not so much how do we completely disrupt and change the way the tea auctions worked. It was, no, go ahead. That system's been around for a while. There's a lot of process and people that are dedicated and investment that goes into maintaining and improving that process. There's actually quite a big gap of unaddressed producers who are creating really high quality teas that needed a way that was just as good or if not better than the way that a tea auction worked. So our focus became focusing on those types of customers and creating the financial infrastructure and the logistical infrastructure and building the bridge between them and buyers from around the world. It really depends on the size of the business. The technology is scalable. You could be a smallholder producing, 100 kilos of tea a month to someone that's producing, 20,000 kilos of tea a day. So it is able to accommodate a wide range of producers and different classes of buyers, depending on how much they want to order. But really the core of it was, where were the unaddressed markets and what solutions did they need to be able to get access to be able to compete at that level?
Classic outcry auctions are limiting, elitist, and outdated. High-volume tea auction centers are now digitized. Smaller producers are drawn to web auctions that attract bidders near and far. Most specialized platforms are generally low volume, however. Palmyra offers high-volume commodity tea, cinnamon, pepper, nutmeg, along with specialty products like polyfloral $5 a kilo dark amber Zambian forest honey and $9 per kilo Sri Lanka cinnamon powder. It offers an Amba Uva Oolong that sells for $150 per kilo, or Pitu bamboo green tea for $145 per kilo.
It's really helpful sometimes to actually take a step back, not just looking at tea itself. And that may seem counterintuitive if you've been working in the tea or even coffee space, which I imagine some of your audience work in for decades. But really what needs to be done, which is the approach we took, is what actually happens in other commodity markets. And you have to ask yourself the question, what's the benchmark in terms of where things could be? And when you look at precious metals, different types of metal markets or wheats, grains, coffee is also actually a great example to actually do research in. You find that most of these markets don't have an auction system. There's no outcry system. And you actually realize very quickly that in terms of the scale of how good a market could look like, the auction outcry system is on the bottom end of where it starts. And when you look at the more mature markets, you find that there's a risk market involved where people can speculate and trade. They can manage risks around prices going up and down through the use of financial instruments like futures and forwards. We see that with corn, oil, gold, silver, wheats. The big commodities that you can sort of think of, there's a financing element that's available to them, not in a closed system, but access into a global capital market where you have billions and trillions of dollars of trade financing flowing into these commodities, making it easier so that producers can grow quicker, traders can speculate, buyers can grow quicker. So when you look at these systems, when we touch on certifications, for example, they have a full system around that. They have a full system around warehouse receipts and the ability to use that as collateral. So there's actually a huge opportunity in terms of some markets that we've looked into that may seem like they run really well, but when you actually look at it with a different lens, from the lens of what are the biggest and most mature markets doing, they actually do things very differently. And in some cases, you'll never get to that end of what is possible just because the way some of these markets work. And one of our advisors actually was the former chief of commodities of the United Nations. He's set up commodity exchanges from scratch in countries such as India, Indonesia. The Indian Multi-Commodities Exchange, when he was there, was the second biggest commodities exchange in the world. And he was able to see some of the impacts that he was able to have through the exchange. So our goal was never to outcompete an existing system. Our goal was always to expand the bandwidth of what people were already doing today and fill the gaps as well. And we have a very different mentality, which I think comes from the fact that many of the team members come from a blockchain background, and the blockchain background isn't so much how do I serve myself. in the best way, but how do I serve the ecosystem in the best way? So we have a system that we follow called a minimum viable ecosystem when we enter new markets, when we enter new commodities, where we have a blueprint which says who are the key people within the ecosystem that we need to collaborate with, not compete against, but collaborate with. And the thing about tea that I love so much is that not only is it a welcoming industry, but there's a lot of really good systems that already exist. You have the exporters, for example, in countries such as Sri Lanka, that have a great network into freight forwarding partners. They have a great understanding of how logistics works. They have a great understanding of how warehousing works. And you can say the same with brokers, for example, who have an intimate understanding of how you do financing, how you have grading and certifications, how you build that trust with producers and with buyers, and the regulators as well, who've been doing this from the beginning, trying to create a regulatory framework which enables people to perform and enables people to grow. So for us, it was never we want to build something that replaces the auction. It was so much we want to build something that empowers those on the edges firstly, but ultimately can collaborate with all of the skills and all of the processes that these people have. And I'm not an expert when it comes to grading. I'm not an expert when it comes to logistics, but we have a collaborative approach. And if we're able to pull the right people together, which we have to date, we can empower all of these producers and we can change the way commodities such as tea are bought. And we can change the narrative around the lack of trust that exists in these cross-border transactions.
Selling tea to neighbors at local markets worked great in China, where the average domestic price in 2022 for a kilo of green tea was $22, about 161 renminbi. Export prices, however, averaged only $1.59 per kilo for Chinese green tea. The situation is reversed in India, East Africa, Nepal, Indonesia, and Sri Lanka, where the export prices far exceed domestic retail. Direct sales are common worldwide. The difference today is that distant markets seeking premium tastes are willing to pay higher prices for quality tea.
Just to touch on the bit around pricing and price discovery, I think you nailed that on the head. And it's not so much that there isn't enough people doing these direct sales, because there's a lot of people doing direct sales. And there's a lot of people doing direct sales either by word of mouth or email in a somewhat archaic system, which doesn't happen anywhere in other commodities. That can definitely be improved upon. But when you have a platform such as Palmyra, you get access to really important data. And you have a better visibility around teas being sold in all sorts of different types of markets. And you can start to build a map of understanding like which teas get sold into which regions, how are they priced? And instead of just being a standalone producer making high quality teas, you empower them with price information. You give them information around these are the types of teas that sell into these markets at these prices, and they get a much better feedback system in terms of how should they price their teas, what are other companies doing around marketing, storytelling, and which is a bit that you just mentioned, Dan. And the thing that shocked me, which I was saying to you earlier, was that all of these producers have such depth in terms of their story, the purpose of what they're doing, and how they're doing it as well. And often a lot of this doesn't actually come through. It's not so much that consumers are trying to source tea directly from a producer. A lot of these producers are doing B2B. They're selling to other businesses such as, leading online stores. So it might be a brick and mortar store who then have their own customer base. And if you're unable to actually translate the story, if you're unable to be able to share that story so that after that B2B to C, the customer understands what the story is, then we're doing a disservice. And the producer gets a disservice done to them as well, because the tea at the end of the day doesn't get sold at the price it probably should be. So being able to succinctly tell a story around the producer, for example, it could be Holiska, who runs Siddha Devi Tea in Nepal. Like, I'm sure you've heard of her story before, and her story around empowering women and training these world-class female tea makers who used to be victims of domestic violence or different sort of social outcomes they had previously in the past. And to be able to share a story like that is incredible because the end consumer cares about it so much. So for us, that was one thing, but being able to do it through data was another bit as well. And we had spent a lot of time building out our traceability protocol, which not only tracks information around provenance, but allows you to embed certification and credentials and different data points that ultimately can be shared. And because this stuff sits on the blockchain, it's not so much we have to do a download on our private database and send you the information. It's already there. The end buyer who then sells to the end consumer takes that data and says, cool, thank you. I'm going to add my bits to it. And then the consumer gets access to that complete chain of data throughout the supply chain itself. And that's the thing that I think is a bit of a game changer that we don't talk too much about just yet. But it empowers the end buyers and the end consumers to have the full understanding of where this tea is from, what the story is, and why they should ultimately buy it.
Sam, will you explain how Palmyra facilitates financing?
Take a lesson from what the brokers have been doing. It's collateralized lending, which they're actually providing. They take stock of the tea itself in a warehouse that is in essence licensed, because they're one of, in Sri Lanka, for example, there's the 8 brokers who are licensed by the tea board. Like, there's so many opportunities that could be done there, and making sure capital flows into the right places. And microloans, exactly like you said, can have an enormous impact if done right. And if done across a big base, there's a lot of capital that can flow into this space. So that was something that's important to us long term and in the medium term, that we collect the right data so that we can prove this stuff to those that are willing to lend. And the last bit on the data piece is around traceability and compliance requirements. So what you've seen, assuming you're so up to date on this, is the European Union's deforestation regulation is one example of many to come, where governments and some of the largest import markets are now beginning to regulate what is allowed to come into the countries and come into the trading blocks. And they will require data, and in this case, traceability types of data, traceability requirements and compliance requirements, in order to let the products in. So the EUDR doesn't impact tea yet, but impacts coffee. It impacts palm oil, impacts a number of different commodities. And it's a matter of time until tea goes on that list. And when tea goes on that list, my question is, who is helping tea producers? Who is providing the technology to tea producers at the grassroots level, all the way up to larger businesses, to be able to actually collect that data and comply with the regulations? Because if people don't do that, then the reality is that many people lose access to these big markets. It's not just European Union. The US is starting to put some stuff into place through the FDA traceability program, which starts in 2026. And this stuff has to start today. And we've been investing in traceability technology for the last 2 years. It's only now that it's starting to make sense and that we've got some real applications that can be used. But it takes a while to build these solutions and to actually spend the time thinking about what is required and what works on the ground properly, all the way up to what works at the regulatory level. And my concern is that not enough people are actually worried about this stuff, and that, if left behind, the producers get left behind. And I think the complacency around not tackling some of these problems in some markets, not all, but in some markets, is going to place a huge risk on the producers in the region whose main focus right now is to produce tea. It's not to collect data. But if we don't shift that focus, then market access becomes a huge issue all of a sudden. So that is what defines our sort of data strategy and what we believe is what's the most crucial in terms of what we capture in the system and how we can translate that back to the people using it.
Produced by Audavita Studios. Connect your voice to the world.
Hey guys, time to get in on the action for the biggest moments in basketball with PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projections, place your entry, and win up to 100 times your money. Right now, PrizePicks will match your first deposit of up to $100. Just download the PrizePicks app and use the code GET100. That's code GET100 on PrizePicks for a first deposit match of up to $100. PrizePicks. Pick more. Pick less. It's that easy.